Looking ahead, challenges and opportunities in the changing world. Welcome to Talking Economics, a podcast by the Center for Economic Research and Graduate Education, Economics Institute. The challenges of recent years bring mental health issues to the fore of all science fields, including economics. What are the long-term mental health trends? What were the effects of the pandemic on mental health? We will be discussing this today with our guest, Liyou Borga. Liyou Borga is a CERGE-EI PhD in economics graduate and a Postdoctoral Fellow at the Luxembourg Institute of Health. His main research experience lies in applied econometrics, mainly health, labor, and development economics. Currently, he is working on the evaluation of innovative digital healthcare services. Welcome, Liyou.
Thank you for having me.
Liyou, we're going to talk about mental health. Why are economists talking about mental health?
Important question. Well, the short answer is economists would like to talk about almost everything. I want to make clear that even though I have collaborated a lot on research related to mental health, I'm an economist, so my expertise is quite limited. So most of my answers are only from an economist's perspective, working on self-reported data, etc. So my suggestions and my analysis should always be taken with this caveat. But from several years of decades of research, we came to realize that mental health topic is a very important one because it correlates with many economic factors. Traditionally, economists have dealt with the question of well-being through the lens of what we call utility. So we assume that individuals are rational, they are fully informed, and they seek to maximize utility. And then we infer the well-being of these individuals from the decisions that they make, which we call the revealed preference approach, and then also from their behavior. But then in the last few decades, a new strand of literature kind of took off, which mainly focused on the economics of happiness, quote unquote. And in this literature strand, people's self-reported well-being is used as an indicator, and that has been correlated with different economic and social factors. And more recently, economists actually now are studying mental well-being by itself, like using data from psychology and the medical field, psychological indicators such as validated questionnaires to diagnose mental health, as well as more recently biomarkers, etc. So economists are interested in this because research have shown that mental health decrease, poor mental health is associated with decreased productivity, increased unemployment, etc. And on a macro level, the cost of mental health is quite large. The World Health Organization, I think, estimates that only depression and anxiety disorders cost globally over $1 trillion US dollars per year in lost productivity. And actually, a recent Lancet publication shows that figure could even escalate up to 5 trillion if we include other mental health disorders than depression and anxiety alone. So both in the macro and micro level, mental health has a lot of implications that interests economists.
Mm-hmm. You already hinted some of the data that are used for this research. Can you tell us more about the data that is that economists are using for their research of mental health? And are there any changes? Do we see any changes in their availability and scope?
Economists traditionally depend on survey information. And in this survey information, people are usually asked to self-diagnose themselves or to express how they feel. One of these questions is the ladder question, where individuals are asked to imagine which on the ladder they consider themselves are, the top step being the best that they can feel and the lower step being the worst that they could feel. They are also asked to express how they feel in some particular point in time. Other things being considered, how happy did you feel yesterday? Kind of questions. And these were used to basically elicit the subjective well-being of individuals. I think in the psychology literature, they do even more because they have diagnostic tools to actually diagnose mental health. And some of these diagnostic tools have also been incorporated in surveys so that people assess their mental health, and there are validated questionnaires to measure and score anxiety symptoms, depressive symptoms, loneliness, perceived stress, etc., and people's self-worth and life satisfaction. These are all have incorporated in many of the big longitudinal surveys that many economists draw evidence from, like the German socioeconomic panel, the British household survey, to name a few. And many international studies also include these subjective well-being questions in their surveys.
Mm-hmm. Super. And now, so we do have the data. Our topic is challenges and opportunities. We have all heard about the impact of the pandemic and that it had a major negative impact on the mental health. So can you tell us more about this, the details of the impact?
Yes, it's still too early, but there have been already a lot of literature out there showing the effect of the pandemic on mental health. The immediate effects include increased anxiety, increased depression and stress level, social isolation, loneliness, economic insecurity. All of these have been documented in many countries and many settings. And there has been a systematic correlation between the impact of the pandemic on mental health and the severity of the pandemic in that particular setting. So countries which had severe, who were affected highly by the pandemic are also countries where most people are expressing increased depression, anxiety, etc. So yeah, there has been severe mental health toll of the pandemic already documented.
And are there any differences in terms of gender or age?
Two things here, like there is the general correlation between gender and mental health, or age and mental health, and then there is the additional contribution of the pandemic on top of that. So normally, especially in the economics literature, in the economics of happiness literature, there has been a very stable relationship between age and mental health, or age and at least subjective well-being, which is sort of a U-shaped relation where people in the middle age are feeling the worst, and younger and older people feel relatively better. So that U-shape has been stable for a long time, but recently, more from the medical field, we're getting more data and results that show that young people are also suffering from mental health problems, and suicide rates, etc., has been increasing for young people in the age of 15 and 29. So there is already some trend which shows that there is an increasing trend of increasing mental illness among the youth. When it comes to gender, again, without factoring in the pandemic, women were shown to be more prone to mental health problems than men in many of the mental health disorders, for example, depression, anxiety, loneliness, etc. Women are traditionally more affected by these problems, while men are more affected by bipolar disorder, or alcohol and substance use, schizophrenia, etc. So there were these already existing differences in gender and age, and the pandemic probably only exacerbated those differences. We see that women are relatively more negatively affected by the pandemic than men, and this is mainly probably due to their gender roles, due to the containment and lockdown measures put in place by many governments. Women were forced to stay, many of us were forced to stay home, but at the same time, caregiving facilities, etc., were shut down. So women had to take the lion's share of the responsibility in caring for children or the elderly, and also doing most of the household chores. So there is this increased responsibilities in the household. Also, from the labor market, the industries that are most affected happen to also employ more proportionately women, so that also creates some sort of financial strain. And in some cultures and in some societies, there is also the increase in domestic violence, intimate partner violence, which is another layer of consequence for women. So yes, the pandemic clearly exacerbates the already existing gender and age imbalances in mental health.
Mm-hmm. Are we able to say, or is it too early, whether these are just short-term or whether this might have long-term impacts? Or when we'll be able to say that? When we'll be able to?
Again, too early to say that, but we do have precedent. I mean, the literature I keep referring back to, the economics of happiness literature from people like Richard Easterlin, Andrew Oswald, Andrew Clark, etc. There has been a very rich amount of evidence collected over the last 30, 40 years. And we know a few patterns, especially they show that people are kind of resilient. They bounce back, which they call adaptation. There is strong literature showing that people bounce back, for example, from bereavement, divorce, and some disability, illness, etc. So they use longitudinal data and showing that people's subjective well-being before the event and after the event, with some dip during the event. So people bounce back to their normalcy. Actually, for some negative life events, such as divorce, people actually even become a bit more happier after a certain period of time. So people do bounce back. And unfortunately, the same happens to positive life events. So people who won the lottery, people who got married, people who had children will go back to their pre-event level of satisfaction after a bit of a high from that particular life event. So we know that we kind of bounce back. There are some life events such as unemployment, which is kind of sticky. So the people who suffer unemployment or job loss tend to retain the dip in their life satisfaction, and that's kind of a bit sticky. But for many life events, we've seen that people kind of bounce back and go back to their normal level of life satisfaction, etc. Will we see that after the pandemic? We'll have to wait and see, because the pandemic touched a lot of individual, social, as well as economic, macro level aspects. So it's too early to actually say that, yes, we'll definitely come back. But given, for example, here at the University of Luxembourg, we were working on a data that covers 6 countries, and we were tracking their mental health starting from, I don't know, May 2020 until recently the fall of 2022. So for almost 3 years, we've been following their trajectories, and we noticed a certain pattern that the mental health of the participants kind of goes in tandem with the severity of the pandemic and the severity of the lockdown measures. So it's at its lowest when the lockdown measures are strict and the pandemic is at its highest, and then it improves as things started opening up and restrictions are lifted. So we already see that there is some kind of pattern that emerged, which is positive and encouraging, but we'll have to wait and see for the long-term consequences.
Speaking about the long-term consequences, you say people bounce back, but these were individual examples. If people would be bouncing back, do we see this also on the aggregate data? So does it mean that people are at the same level of happiness and satisfaction and maybe mental health status as they were, say, 40 years ago or 50 years ago? Or do we see long-term trend generation by generation that it's changing?
Hard to say, because when we talk about 40 years of data, things change other than thing that we're currently talking about. So it's not always easy to disentangle whether it's just the mental health trajectory that's changing, or maybe other things are contributing to this change at the same time. So for example, the way people look at mental health issues 40 or maybe more years ago is quite different from how we see it now. I'm not saying there is no more stigma or discrimination now, but it's much improved than it used to be several years ago. So there used to be this stigma and discrimination against mental health illnesses. In the past, we even had asylums and institutions where we keep people locked in just because they have some sort of mental illness. So those things have changed, and now we also diagnose better. The medical field has shown a very amazing transformation in terms of the ability to detect diseases, the ability to diagnose, the ability to treat many, not only mental health, but other illnesses as well. So that development and that advancement can also have an impact on how we diagnose and how we treat mental health as well. So given all those caveats, has the mental health picture changed over the past 40 years? Yeah, a little, I think. But we lack the data. So I'm only aware of one such data set which tracks the trajectory of mental health over several years. And given by that data, the pattern is kind of stable. Yes, there is some increase in the number of diagnoses made, but that's to be expected. One with population increase, and two with the improvement in diagnostics abilities, etc. So yes, there is that trend, but again, it's really it needs more digging and it needs more research to actually definitively say the pattern is improving or not.
Thank you. You already touched upon my next question, which is the topic of stigmatization of mental health illnesses. So has the pandemic at least helped with destigmatizing the topic? Can we tell that it's getting better also because of the pandemic, because it highlighted the issues and their importance? And
I can only speculate. I've seen a recent study which came out in 2019, I think. So it's, well, at least the data they use is up to 2019. So the pandemic has nothing to do with it, but they've shown that at least in the US over the past 20 years, trends in public stigma of mental health has declined. People are now more accepting of mental health illnesses. They were asked if they would socialize, if they would marry, if they would work with, if they would be neighbors with, etc., with different people suffering from a range of mental disorders, and people were more accepting of that compared to their attitude back in 1996, for example. So definitely, there are some studies showing that, yes, the stigma is declining. Will COVID-19 and the pandemic contribute towards this positive trend? I hope so, and I think so. But I haven't yet seen a study actually showing that. Maybe there are, but I haven't looked and I haven't came across it. But your hypothesis seems to make sense for me, at least. The fact that people were like isolated for a while, and the fact that they have now came to realize the importance of social contacts, the importance of having the freedom to do things, etc., may make them aware that mental health is something to seriously consider, and that we all might have some sort of need in terms of our mental health that we didn't think about before. So I'm sure that positively contributes to the reduction in stigma.
And speaking about opportunities, there is the other side of the problem, which is the treatment, right? And the availability of services and support for people who suffer from mental health problems. And at least in the Czech Republic, we've seen a long-term shortage of these services, which was, of course, worsened by the pandemic because the demand has increased dramatically and the supply didn't have a chance to respond. Do you see any changes, or do you see any country differences, and do you see any changes in this that the providers would say, okay, this is a topic we really need to focus on and we need to change this and improve?
Again, my information is a bit limited as this needs a proper consideration to give a definitive answer. But I agree with the couple of things that you said. One is that, yes, there's going to be a big spotlight on the facilities. Do we have access to mental health services? Are countries doing enough to make sure that their people have these services available, etc.? There was one report, I think March 20 is, I think, a day that kind of commemorates the mental health, and there has been a couple of reports released already by the WHO about the focusing on the progress that we made in the last 20 years over mental health. And a few things that they highlight is that, yes, we need to deepen our commitment to strengthen care and to transform mental health in many countries. And the things they recommend is that we need to make access available. We need to increase our investment into mental health as well, because talking from a purely economics point of view, it's the cost-benefit analysis is very clear. Investing in mental health will pay off very well. And so we need to strengthen the mental health care, and countries need to start investing and increasing their supply of mental health services. So this is made very clear, and I think many countries are now realizing that. And if you notice the reimbursement strategies of some of the countries, they're now making sure that mental health treatments are reimbursed and etc. So this is a positive trend, but the need is huge, and commitment and investment has to be equally big in the coming days and years.
Mm-hmm. And this can be further supported by research by economists who will show that this is important and necessary, right?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, already there is a huge body of literature showing definitively with causal analysis that mental health, subjective well-being, life satisfaction, etc., are definitely correlated with all sorts of economic factors, being it productivity, be it overall burden of mental health costs on the economy, etc. So it's definitely a growing literature, and the evidence is already there. So I don't think we're at a stage that we want to see, okay, but there is no evidence, etc. No, the evidence is out there, and now it's time for action, I think.
Thank you, Liyou. It was very informative. Thank you.
Yeah.